When I go to court and lawyers from big firms step up to the bench, they always not just say their own name, but the name of the firm, because it says to the judge, I'm someone important whom you should listen to. I feel very much the same way about the Chicago Council of Lawyers. When I go in and say, I'm Joan Colin, who cares? But when I say, I'm Joan Colin, I co-chair the Chicago Council of Lawyers Committee on Children and Family Law, people sit up and take notice. People who know the Chicago Council of Lawyers know that they need to pay attention to what its members say.
There's a really large constituency of people whose cases won't make headlines, but who can be helped in a really meaningful, tangible way by changing something systematic. And that's the kind of work we try to do in the Chicago Council of Lawyers.
You know, I think it's important to have a bar association that is representative of the concerns of progressives around people of color and people who struggle with poverty. This has always been one of the concerns of the Chicago Council of Lawyers, and I'm grateful.
The Council of Lawyers gives me that vehicle where I can advocate for systemic policy changes that are going to impact all of my clients and a lot of people that I'll never even meet.
I was a board member on the Chicago Council of Lawyers back in the day, and it brought me into contact with a lot of lawyers that I hadn't met who were passionate about access to justice.
What draws us together isn't necessarily being a particular part of the bar. Instead, we all have a certain set of values.
The council isn't so much about furthering your career, it's about furthering the values that brought you to the law in the first place. It's why you went to law school.
There's a good group of people that, if they want to see change, they do the work to make it happen.
The council was formed in 1969. It was a very tumultuous time. It really wasn't that different than today.
The first meetings actually took place fairly soon after the 1968 Democratic Convention. The violence at that convention, when the police marched into the demonstrators in front of the Hilton, was an extraordinary event. The Chicago Bar Association, instead of denouncing it, defended it. It drove a lot of people to thinking we need something else.
And it was Judd Minor who was the moving force.
He's the one who recruited me. He said, I've got this idea for a new bar association, and he talked about meeting injustice with justice, and it all sounded very attractive to me.
And we had a meeting at the People's Gas Building, and it was quite a big turnout. There were hundreds of people there. It was clear that we struck a chord. That was the beginning.
Lawyers were looking for a way to speak out about what was going on and then to start engaging in systemic reforms that would try to stop it.
And I knew there was going to be a reaction to it because I was the son of a federal judge. And I get this telephone call that night from my mother saying, Josh, what's this that you're plotting with a bunch of lawyers to overthrow the Chicago Bar Association? I said, Mom, where did you learn that? And it turns out a couple of past presidents of the Chicago Bar had figured the way to diffuse this was to call my mother.
We had been set up explicitly as a counter bar to the Chicago Bar Association.
It was a different voice when there was a lot of reluctance on the part of bar associations to speak honestly or candidly about some of the issues.
You know, we didn't have established relationships that we had to protect. We were out to speak the truth and have the truth have its impact on the legal system.
Our style was so different than the style that preceded us that we were quickly perceived as sort of shrill and sort of dangerous.
And I think the uninhibited quality of the council was very important to its impact. It was willing to say things that other people weren't willing to say.
I would be somewhere and some lawyer I didn't know other than as some heavyweight in Chicago would come up and put his arm around me and sort of take me under his wing and say, listen, Judd, it's not that we disagree with what you're saying. I mean, what you're saying is right, but we shouldn't say these things in public. You know, it just doesn't reflect well on the bar. And I used to say, listen, you know, it strikes me those are precisely the things we should be talking about in public, and not talking about them doesn't reflect well on the bar.
It was a movement that engulfed lawyers who previously hadn't paid much attention to what was going on. We started to have success in terms of evaluating judges, for example, in particular.
The council did an evaluation of all the sitting judges. The council found every judge except 2 to be unqualified.
The council was not shy about criticizing judges, something that the other bar associations in town to a large extent had historically been very nervous or shy about doing. And the result of that was that some judges started to be not retained in the legal system, which had never really happened before. The council became the place to go for what many people consider to be a very analytical approach to evaluating judges.
Early on, the council got the ear of Senator Percy and was able to have an influence with him on the selection of federal judges.
And I interviewed Percy years later for the Chicago Lawyer newspaper. He said, I relied on the Chicago Council of Lawyers because they gave me honest and independent, completely unconstrained input about the qualities of the people I was considering appointed.
Influence with Senator Percy, I don't know that it was terribly public, but people learned about it, and it was very helpful in moving the council forward.
The council in the 70s and its early 80s did what it needed to do in order to do what's right.
I have always thought that the council over the 70s probably had more impact on the Chicago legal system than any local bar association ever had on any legal system anywhere.
Those pioneers said to the legal community that lawyers can come together and make things happen for the better, and that we have an obligation, we as lawyers have an obligation to do that. That's something that just wasn't being said in the 1970s.
When I look back at the lists of people who were participating in what they were doing, it was a very impressive group of people and projects. I think it suffered through this kind of dip that you mentioned.
In the 90s, the council was starting to run out of steam.
I think virtually everyone would agree without Malcolm, the organization wouldn't still be around.
Malcolm has obviously been very important in energizing the organization and keeping it going.
Malcolm is the James Madison to Judd George Washington, and he has kept the organization going and intact through its roughest periods.
This is all part of a different era that we're in today. The beginning of the second golden era of the council started in 1997. If you put those two organizations together, you have something very special. And that we call the collaboration for justice. The council's refrain, that you do what's right, that's a culture that the Chicago Council of Lawyers brought to the table before Chicago Appleseed was ever born. And that will always guide the collaboration for justice.
Through their partnership with Appleseed, they are taking on data-driven social policy that really makes a significant difference. The work that they've done in access to the courts and around bail reform, I believe, has been invaluable, and they stand out for that work.
Stakeholders really listen to us because when we have a real solution to a problem, they'll sit down to a meeting with us and say, all right, what can we do about this? We come up with practical, workable solutions to problems.
And that's what Appleseed and the council is all about. Developing an idea into a project, which develops into recommendations, which develops into advocacy strategies.
We're not afraid to criticize, but at the same time, the work that the council does is also pragmatic. And so we were founded as, and still are, something of a counter bar association, but we're one that has the ear of, I think, everyone.
It is a great combination that makes me confident that we're going to last another 50 years.
It's an exciting time to be involved with an organization like this.
Through its collaboration for justice, now is not just the Chicago Council of Lawyers. In many ways, it's the National Council of Lawyers, because of the ideas that were focused exclusively on Cook County can now be extended nationally.
So if you want to make things better, this is the place to go.
You don't have to wait until you've had 2 years of experience, 3 years of experience to get in there and make a difference.
If you're doing systemic reform work, you're not doing something like just sort of shrugging your shoulders and saying like, the system's broken. You're saying, I want to fix the system. If you feel that as a lawyer, you have an obligation in order to make that system fairer, to make it more accessible, I think that the Chicago Council of Lawyers is the best delivery system to carry out that obligation.
For those of you who are not yet members, I challenge you to join the work of the council. Not as a means to advance your careers, but to use your power as lawyers to help your fellow residents in need and to make a positive impact in our communities. Thank you all for your work, passion, and commitment to creating a better city that is a beacon of justice, hope, and opportunity for all Chicagoans for generations to come.